Hi friends, thank you so much for your patience with this video. I actually recorded it at home and I watched it and I didn't really like the direction it went, so I'm re-recording, and so you'll have to excuse me. We're on the road. We are on our first road trip slash vacation as a human family of 3, and for my sobriety birthday we are headed to the west coast of Florida. But I wanted to go ahead and jump right in so that I don't make this video like 5 hours long, because I mean, how do you tell your sobriety 11 years of a sobriety story in 10 minutes? You can't. But I'm going to try and answer as many questions as I can. I'm sure I could do a part 2 at some point, but I'll just concentrate on getting sober and what that looked like for me. So I got sober when I was 23 years old, so I'm 34 now, so I have 11 years of sobriety. And I had one of those just normal, crazy childhoods of somebody who started really young. I was off and running when I was 13, and I just kept going, and I had a good solid of 10 years of just crazy living and tons of stories I could tell, and tons of drugs and tons of alcohol, and I really don't want to concentrate on that, because I'd much rather concentrate on the solution and how I got sober. But it was one of those existences where I lived to party. I lived to be the life of the party, and my life was pretty shallow and meaningless, and I just lived for that next drug and that next drink. And when I was 23 years old, I hit my rock bottom. So a few people asked, what was your rock bottom? And I asked these questions on my Instagram. So feel free to come follow me on Instagram and Facebook if you ever want to ask me any questions for my next video, or you can comment below here and subscribe. But a couple people asked me what my rock bottom was, and I had a very defined rock bottom with my drinking. I mean, it was always pretty gnarly, and so what makes that day so significant out of all of the other days and all the other things that I had to wake up to and experience and go through? Why was it on that day that I decided to get sober? Well, I think it was a kind of like a mixture of a couple of different things that happened that month and that week and that time in my life. At that point already, my parents were not helping me anymore financially. I mean, they never really helped me that much financially anyway, but at that point there was no if I asked for help, it was always a no. So at that point in my life, I was living in Eugene, Oregon, and I had moved there. I pulled a geographic, and that's Kevin's Instagram name, because we both have pulled geographics in our life, and we just thought it was cute and it has to do with sobriety and life. But I pulled a geographic from Miami, where I was born and raised, to Eugene, Oregon, of all places, and asked me how I got there. Well, my sister had moved out there, and she pretty much just picked a city on the map and moved there from where she was living, and I just needed to get out of Miami because my life was just getting so crazy, and she was really worried that I was going to wake up dead, floating in a canal somewhere. So she convinced me to move out there, and I went through that little town like a hurricane and hit my rock bottom one weekend when I was, sorry, all the bumps. I was dating a guy, and we got in a huge, we were just hanging out one night and partying, and he just was I don't want to be with you anymore. You have 30 days to get out of my house. We were always fighting and fist fighting, and just really all my relationships were really dysfunctional and just crazy before I got sober. And that same week, my boss had sat me down. I worked for a mom and pops, and he had sat me down and told me that they were genuinely really worried about me. And when you're in trouble when you're in the restaurant industry and your boss is saying that he's worried about you. Because in the restaurant industry, it's pretty normal to just rage and party and pull all-nighters and stuff like that. But I was at the point where I was staying up for days and days and days. And I had actually already been doing that for years, where I would just like stay up all through the night and go to work the next day, party and all through the night. And I'd go 2 or 3 days at some point without even sleeping and just living like this, which is, you know, at some point people are going to start to notice, because you're just not right, you know. And I was trying to go to college, and I was in community college, and I was getting letters in the mail that I was failing that because I wasn't going to school. So, you know, that was all happening, and it was my birthday weekend. I was turning 23, and I, was just, the only person I could call was my drug dealer. That's the only friend I had left at that point. And I remember there was like this come to Jesus moment where I was like in a dive bar, and I saw a woman who, was living my old lifestyle for a very, very long time. She could have been in her 40s or 50s, and was just like wasted, and her clothes were falling off of her, and she had like no teeth, and she was like dancing and falling on the floor. And I had this moment where I was like, that is going to be me. That is going to be me if I don't get my shit together. And I went, back to that apartment I was living in, or townhouse living in, with my then ex, and I went to work the next morning crazy hungover. And one of my good friends who I worked with and used to party with had about 3 months of sobriety at that point, and she looked amazing. Her eyes were just like clear, and she was losing weight, and she was like doing really crazy things, like riding her bike, stuff that I would never do. You guys have to understand that, like, I know you all know me as a health and fitness person on social media, but my life before, Beachbody was that. It was just drinking and drugs and smoking cigarettes and 100% unhealthy, and I had a complete disregard for my body. So I have been on both ends of the spectrum, and I would have to say that, seeing her all of a sudden just like have this life all of a sudden just like come alive in her made me know that like it works, because I'd see her, she'd come and show me, look at my 30 days, my 60 days, and then my 90 days, and I couldn't believe that she stayed sober for so long. I couldn't believe that she was sober for 90 days, for 3 months. Like, I was like, and I knew AA worked because growing up, there's a lot of young people that I hung out with in Miami who got sober really young, because like I said, we were off and running pretty young. So a lot of my friends got sober pretty young, and if they didn't get sober, most of them died. So you either got sober or you died, or some of the people I used to hang out with ended up being like normal and not having to get sober. But I've lost a lot of people in my life because of this disease and because of the what it does to you. And to see somebody that I partied with like sober, and I knew AA worked, but it was just like never an option. And I didn't really know that I was an alcoholic until I realized that I had a problem. Like, it was just like, I knew I had a problem, but when you hang out with a lot of people who live the way you live, and you are surrounding yourself around people who are worse than you or the same, it's really easy to convince yourself that you don't have a problem. But to the rest of the world, it's not normal. And so I told her, I was like, I'm ready. I want to go to a meeting. Can you take me to a meeting? And she's like, yes, we can go tonight. And I didn't expect it all to happen so quickly, but she's like, yes, we can go tonight. Let's go tonight. So I got off of work, and I got in her car, and she took me to my first She took me to my first meeting, which I got a sponsor at that meeting, and I got phone numbers of a bunch of sober people at that meeting, and I raised my hand that I was new, and I jumped in with both feet to the program. And the program is Alcoholics Anonymous, and I did my steps in 30 days, and I was sponsoring other women after, like, in my first 30 days, and I went to 90 meetings in 90 days. So no matter how busy I was, or no matter how, what was going on in my life, I made it a priority to go, because my attitude was that if I worked as hard on my sobriety as I worked on my drinking, and I worked on partying, then I'd probably have pretty great results. So that was my attitude. I never made an excuse, because I always asked myself, like, at what lengths would I go to find, to get high or to get drunk? So I made it a priority in my life, and I changed everything. I changed my entire lifestyle, changed everybody I hung out with, I changed everything I did for fun. And, you know, a lot of the questions I got was like, well, was it really hard to leave your friends? And did you, you know, what was that like? And they have a saying in the program that goes, you don't leave your friends leave you. And that was my experience. I remember my sponsor, which is why it's important to have a sponsor, because they kind of guide you. It's kind of like a sobriety coach, and they have done it before, and they take you through the steps. So, you know, she just said, like, just tell your friends that, you know, you're just taking a little break and that you'll be back in a couple months. And just like, and then see in a couple months if they're still around. And she was completely 100% correct. After about 3 months, they stopped texting me, they stopped calling me, they didn't want to have anything to do with me because I wasn't drinking and partying anymore. And I made new friends, I made sober friends and people that I would go and drink coffee with. And I met Kevin after 5 months. So that was a question that I got too, was, you know, did you and Kevin get sober together? What did that look like? And so there's a lot of suggestions in the program, and I just want to make this very clear. It's a spiritual program, but it's not a religious program. We are not religious people, and it really worked for us because we could pick our own higher power. And Kevin is a Buddhist, and Buddhism is what really resonates for him. And I love Buddhism as well. It's not a religion though, but like it works well for me when I practice it. But I really am just kind of like a universal kind of believer, where I just believe that my higher power is just all around me at all times. And nature is a big part of that for me, which is why I have to be out in nature all the time. And I have to be where it's sunny, and like I just need to know that like I'm alive all the time, because I just felt so dead for so long. And so Kevin and I met after 5 months, and we were strongly advised not to get together. The rule is, the suggestion, but the rule is that you shouldn't get into a relationship within your first year. And the reason for that is that they don't want you to make each other like your program. But when we decided that we liked each other, and we went through that whole courting process that was quite awkward, because I had never in my entire life gotten to a relationship sober, had sex sober, and we didn't have sex right away. We made it very clear that our sobriety was number one, and that we were going to be friends first. And it was the first time in my whole entire life that like our whole relationship had started off like with communication. Like before we even kissed for the first time, we had a conversation. We were very like, healthy about it. And so our entire like foundation of our marriage has been based off of like what is best for us as individuals and as a team, even before we were, a couple. So it's pretty cool. And so, so I had him, and I had a bunch of new friends, and like and when you get sober after you have literally done drugs and drank your entire life for fun, everything feels new. So it was like I was a baby again. Like I was experiencing life for the first time at 23 years old. So everything was a novelty, like even I remember one time, like I had this moment where I was just sitting in my car, just like watching like the wind blow. And I just was like, everything's like HD. It's like you're seeing life in HD, because your brain just clears up. And then somebody asked me if I had withdrawals. And I actually didn't have withdrawals. I had post-acute withdrawal symptoms, which is, the acronym is PAUSE, and you can Google it. But post-acute withdrawal symptoms is when the synapses in your brain like start to reconnect after killing them and destroying them for so long. And it can cause like moodiness, mess with your sleep, and emotions, like weird emotions, and just it's part of the healing process, So, but I didn't have withdrawals because I wasn't like a all-day drinker. I was mostly just like, I would not drink, and then I would drink. I go on benders, and I take a couple days clean, and sometimes I take a couple months clean. But for the most part, like I didn't need it to function. I just really liked the party. And, once I had that first drink, I was off and running. So if I didn't have that first drink, I could stay sober just fine. But once I had that first drink, I was off and running. It was, 3 days before I was done. right? And the saying goes, one is too many and 1,000 is never enough. And that was definitely me. And that's when I got into those rooms and I started reading the big book and I would hear things like that. I was like, that is so me, you know? And I started realizing that, like, okay, this is a disease. This is how all these people feel. Like, I'm not alone. And that's why going to the rooms and being part of the community is so important, because I could hear people's stories and realize that, like, oh, like, my story isn't even that bad, even though it was pretty bad, and nobody's that impressed by, like, all the terrible things you did, because they all did terrible things too, and you're not weird. And it was really good for me. It's what I needed for, like, my first couple years. And that being said, you know, I stopped having a sponsor after about 2 to 3 years, and I stopped going to meetings regularly after about 3 years. We still went to meetings when we lived in San Francisco. We'd pop into them every so often. We kept because we move around so often, we'd have to, like, start going to meetings and meet people. And the last place we went to meetings often was Bend, and it was actually cool. Last time we were in Bend, I was pregnant, and we were sitting outside while the bro was waiting for dinner, and one of the dudes that we used to know from when we lived in Bend walked up. He's like, "Hey guys, how's it going?" And we were just, like, talking to him. It was pretty cool because I haven't seen him since I moved there. But went to a couple meetings in Puerto Rico, but they really didn't have any like, we lived in, like, Rincon is like a drinking town, so there was this pretty cool place in Rincon, but there was only, like, 3 people that would go to that meeting. But they are everywhere, and that's the cool thing about the program, is, like, we can go to meetings whenever we want, wherever we want, and we are always welcome, even if we don't work a perfect program, or we're not perfect, or we're not sponsoring other people. However we wish to work our program, you know, we're going to go to a meeting when we get home from our vacation next Friday, and it's important to me to at least go on my birthday, and to at least attempt to keep going back, because at this point I don't go back to stay sober. And I think that's the important thing I just really want to say, is that at this point in my sobriety, like, people ask me, like, is it hard to be around alcohol? Or when you go, somebody specifically asked, like, when you go to a Beachbody event, is it hard because everybody's drinking? And I'm like, do realize that everybody drinks everywhere, right? Like, it's not just on a vacation. It's really funny how people will just, like, forget that, like, the rest of the world rages all the time. And honestly, I've never been that kind of an alcoholic where, like, once I decided I was getting sober, like, I never relapsed. I never had a problem with alcohol ever again. I worked around alcohol. So, like, the first week of my sobriety, I remember I went to go tap a keg for work, and it blew up in my face, and I was completely covered in IPA from head to my toe. And it didn't bother me. It didn't make me want to drink. I've never wanted to drink again. And I think the reason is because I dove into the steps, and my sponsor moved me through them as fast as she could. And because when you finish the steps, you know, you're supposed to have the craving of alcohol completely lifted. It's the promises say that, like, you know, everything that you had an issue with when you were drinking should go away, and everything that they promised came true for me. And I really do believe it was because we were done in the steps in 30 days. We didn't take years for me to do the steps. The only time that I've really seen people, like, relapse in the program is when their sponsors are too lackadaisical about taking them through the steps, or when they take their time to go through them. So they're a couple years sober, and they're still in step 4, and the 4th step is usually where people relapse. So my sponsor knew that. She worked me through the steps very quickly. We didn't linger on the 4th step. We got it done in, like, an hour. You know, it's like, my sponsor was sober from heroin, and she was great. You know, she's exactly what I needed. She was a tough ass, and she's exactly what I needed for that first couple months. And then I met Kevin, and she divorced me, or she fired me, and I found a new sponsor that was, you know, more gentle, and exactly what I needed at the time too. So, you know, everybody that I needed to help me get sober came to me at those moments that I needed them the most. So I've never struggled with drinking. I've never had a relapse. I've never wanted to drink, but I do believe it's because I did the work. I did the work so that I could have so that, because I didn't want to obsess over alcohol for the rest of my life, and I was told that if I did it, then I wouldn't have to. If I did those steps, I wouldn't have to. So, and it's true, and I haven't had to, and I don't mind being around alcohol. I don't mind being around people drinking. It doesn't bother me at all. Their choices don't affect my life at all. It only affects me when they get so drunk that it's a little scary or dangerous or not fun for me anymore, because it's like it's not fun to have a conversation with somebody who's wasted. They're just screaming at you and not like emotional and not making sense, and it's not, at a certain point. I'm so happy for you. I'm so proud of you.
That is so cool. You don't drink.
And I was like, okay, bye. It's 11 o'clock. Time for me to go. It's the witching hour has come. I don't know. It's just not an option for me. It's just not something that I do. It's just not an option. It's not something I do. It's not something I entertain. It's not even something that I want. And somebody asked me too, like, what have you ever considered reintroducing alcohol into your life now that you've been sober? Kevin's over here laughing. Reintroduce alcohol into your life after 10 years, because don't you think you could have it at this point? And my answer to that is I'm not going to even see. It's like Russian roulette. Like, asking an alcoholic that question is like basically like Russian roulette. Like, oh, let's see if I can have a drink, and maybe it'll kill me, maybe it won't. Let's try it. And I think that's really just like not understanding. Sorry, my hair is interesting right now. I think that's just not understanding the way alcoholism works. Alcoholism, and I'm going to try to educate you guys a little bit on alcoholism. Alcoholism is a disease. It's a progressive disease, and it does get worse as you get older. So I've heard a lot of stories of people who have been sober for 10, 15, 20 years, and they have one drink, and everything that they have built in that 20 years literally goes up in flames in like a course of 3 days. And I'm not even exaggerating. And I've heard so many stories, that I'm just like, why? First of all, why would I even test those waters? And I don't even want to drink alcohol. Like, it's not like I don't even want it. So why would I drink it? It doesn't bring anything to the table. It doesn't bring anything to my life. It doesn't add anything to my life. I don't know. It's a very interesting question. It's almost like asking that question of, do you think you're like, I don't know. That question just baffles me. So I'm going to move on. But the answer, short, no. I remember when I was sitting in a meeting and I was new, and I was sitting at the edge of my seat listening to this woman stand on stage and tell her story. And she told the story about how she was like this crazy, punk rock partying chick, and just was like crazy, and her story was just like, whoa, like it was worse than mine, right? Like, I guess she, was partying and raging in the 70s, and it was just like a completely different story. And she was standing up stage telling her story, and the person I was looking at, I could not believe that was her story. And she was insanely successful and beautiful, and sorry, tripod problems. And she just looked so healthy and put together. Sorry, the tripod fell. So different angle, but I just remember just like thinking like, wow, she just looked so beautiful and so put together, and her success story was so inspiring. And I was like, I just was so like, I couldn't believe it. And I thought, well, if she can do that, I can totally do this, and I can totally change my life. And when I look at where I am now, and I didn't just get sober, like I've crushed life. I completely crushed it. And I really like, had a second chance. And that's why I go at life with such passion and such power, because I spent the first 23 years of my life, well, not 23 years, but the first, 10 years of my semi-adult life, just completely trashing my body and trashing my mind, and had complete disregard for my personal well-being, and at points even tried to kill myself, with neglect. And I just everything, and getting sober was the hardest thing I've ever done. And so And so every single thing like that I've come across in life, I know I can handle it. I know I can handle it, and I know I can do it, because if I can get sober, I can do anything. And so I just hope that, you know, sharing this little bit of my story, this long bit of my story, inspires somebody to get sober today. I've seen a lot of women get sober thanks to me being open with my story. And the last thing, you know, before I go, is that was one thing that somebody, you know, asked me, like, well, you know, with the 11th tradition, aren't you not supposed to, like, break your anonymity, the press level of press, or for press, radio, and films? And I will say that I do believe that the big book is a little out of date. It was written in 1939, and everything in the program is a suggestion, not a rule. You can't get kicked out of AA. And what works for me may not work for somebody else, but I chose to break my anonymity after about 5. I started talking about my alcoholism around year 5 or 6 of my sobriety on social media. So it did take a while for me to start sharing about it, because, you know, I didn't want it to be a big part of my presence on social media. But then I realized that it is a big part of my story, and it is the reason why I'm even alive today. So, you know, I chose to break my own anonymity, and I really believe that, you know, that's just about breaking other people's anonymity. And also, back in the 1930s, alcoholism and alcoholics were put in insane asylums and madhouses. So times are a bit different now, and I'm choosing to grow with the times. And, you know, nowadays there's so much support, and online too, and so many different ways to get sober in so many different communities. And I don't believe that being, you know, open with my story can hurt anybody. And it's so cool that we live in a day and age where we can be open about these things, and we don't have to hide them, because our stories can help more people than you can ever imagine. So I'm really proud of my sobriety. I'm not ashamed to be an alcoholic. I was born with this disease. I didn't choose it. It chose me. It does not discriminate. And, you know, it's just like anybody that's born with any other disease. It's just different. You don't see it like you see others, and it kills people differently. It's an allergy to alcohol, and as long as I don't drink, and I take care of my mind, I'll be okay. So thank you so much for watching. Share this with somebody that you think could benefit from it, and don't forget to subscribe, you guys. Bye.